Hello, today we will talk about midterm elections to American Congress, which will be held this year, 3 of November. We will talk why these elections are important, what the role of Congress is, what possible consequences of these elections can be, and how they can affect on the White House policy. As usual, let's start from discussing a new illustration which artist Katya Akvarelina prepared to our podcast about midterm elections. Isaac, what do you think about this illustration and how it is connected with this topic?
Yeah, so it's a game, I guess, of American football. So we can see it from the beginning, it's American. And I think the American political parties have their colours, right? So red is representative of the Republican Party and blue of the Democrats. And in this image, they're competing for this prize of the ball, which we can kind of understand to be the control of Congress and winning the election. This image kind of imagining the elections as sport maybe helps to understand a little bit about the American system of kind of there's fierce competition, but it's within some set of rules or lots of rules, as we'll discuss. And there's really two teams, there's two parties that can win it. It's not so chaotic as other systems in that sense. And kind of just this real competition where one wins everything really at the end of the day. What do you think?
You never know who will win in this situation. And also I paid attention on this signs of American flag on clothes of both teams. On red team there are stripes, and on blue team there are stars. That means that these two teams, they are one whole, which represent American spirit of competition.
And I kind of like these spectators at the front. It feels a bit like us, to be honest. We can only watch this game, see what happens.
Yeah, and whole world are contemplating for these elections and their results, just to understand what future will be, how it can affect on future global policy. Let's briefly talk about the Congress, what it is and what role of Congress in American policy. We know that there are two houses, lower and upper. Lower house is the House of Representatives, and upper is the Senate. So what are their roles?
When the founding fathers were drafting the Constitution of America, they wanted two very different roles for these different houses, and that's kind of shown in every part of them. So the House of Representatives is a lot larger. It has 435 members, and they represent districts across the country, and each district is about 760,000 people. So they're meant to be kind of directly representative of the population. And that's shown in the elections, for example. Each representative is elected every 2 years. So they're constantly campaigning, constantly talking to the voters, needing to really represent public mood today, And for that reason, the House of Representatives is given control over money, basically. They have what's called the power of the purse. So they have the only right to start legislation, like funding bills, basically. And if we imagine, back to the beginning of America, it was really founded on this idea of the need for representation and taxation. So this grievance that the British Empire, was taxing Americans without representation over where this taxes would go. So therefore they created this House of Representatives that's really responsive to the public, 2 years, elected every time. And they're the ones with control over what happens with taxes, basically. And then the Senate is kind of thought of very differently. It's this upper house. It has fewer members, just 100, so 2 per each state. And this means that different states, states with smaller population, the voters there have a lot more say. The smallest states like Wyoming, Montana, very few people there, but they still have 2 senators, the same as the largest states like California, Texas, Florida. So that's really to represent this idea of states and the importance of states in America, and states as a central part of the United States and state identity and so on. And the Senate is elected every 6 years. Each senator is elected every 6 years. And so this kind of has the idea that senators are meant to have a longer term perspective. They're meant to be able to see bigger perspective and not just respond to political feelings in the moment. And so for that reason, their powers are really about stability. So it's about appointments, about treaties, about impeaching a president, as we'll discuss. Yeah, the Senate is kind of less responsive to public opinion every day and more meant to be a kind of stabilizing factor in Congress.
Just to resume, the House of Representatives, it represents population, voters, and the Senate represents states. We have now 435 seats in the House of Representatives. Of them, we have 217 seats for Republicans and 212 Democrats, and also 1 independent and 5 vacancies. Now, so we have a majority of Republicans for now. This midterm election can affect on the results when Democrats can receive a majority. For example, about Senate, we have 100 places, as you mentioned, and remind me, 53 has Republicans, 45 have Democrats, and 2 independent, which vote with Democrats mostly. What about the House of Representatives? Any dollar can be spent without confirm from the House of Representatives. It's mostly their responsibilities, but also all these bills can be confirmed in Senate. The Senate also has this right to initiate some bills, laws, and but they can be adopted without confirm from the House of Representatives. The special role of the Senate is to confirm international agreement of executive branch of power, and at the same time, Trump, what she does now.
Yeah, so we talk about all of these roles, but in reality, what's said in the Constitution and what happens in reality is quite different. Trump makes a lot of agreements without, needing the Senate because there's different mechanisms to do it. So as long as it's not a formal treaty, it's quite possible for Trump just to decide it himself, sign it himself, and there's not much the Senate can do.
Exactly, yeah. So Trump tries to avoid the role of the Congress, of the House and the Senate, but the Senate has such power to confirm executive officials, and also both houses, they both have an important role in impeachment process. If the House of Representatives starts this process, the Senate has to confirm or not confirm. Another important figure in the Congress is the Speaker. It is a third person in the country after the President, Vice President, and Speaker. And its role is really big, and it depends on who has majority in the House of Representatives, and do a president from the same party as a majority or not. And now speaker is Mike Johnson, and we saw this interesting transformation of him when under Biden presidency in 2023. He was a speaker the first time he was elected, and he supported this initiative on financial support of Ukraine. But it was in 2023, but 1 year later, in 2024, before presidential election, he changed his mind, and he said that he had no appetite to vote for Ukraine's support. So how impact changing of president affected on his position when Trump has had big ratings, and they expected his win. A lot of Republicans at those time began to change their behavior according to Trump's policy.
Yeah, it's really key. Like the idea behind how Congress is set up is to have this balance of power. So right now, Republicans control all three parts of government. Well, the executive and both houses of Congress, and this means that there's not really a balance, right? Trump really gets to do what he wants, whereas when you have different parties controlling different parts, the balance is somewhat more towards this, towards the compromise. So Mike Johnson's position changing really just reflects this balance of power. And we'll talk about this, I guess, with the possible consequences of what could Democrats potentially do if they win these elections.
Okay, but before consequences, let's talk about these elections. They has already started in March 2026, and the day of voting will be on Tuesday, 3rd of November. And what can affect on the results of this election?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors. So like you said, they've already started in the sense that Republicans and Democrats hold primaries to see who their candidates will be. So this is a major part of what will happen in especially Senate races, but also House races to an extent. And these take place from the spring right through the summer, I think until about September. It won't all be confirmed who's actually on the ballot paper in all the states. So this is a big deciding factor. Other kind of influences over how people will vote, of course, like the economy is, I think, always the most important thing. So currently, there's the newspaper The Economist has a aggregator of polls to see where the presidential approval is and where the general approval of Republicans and Democrats is. But they also have a section on the most important issues, and by far the most important one right now is inflation and the cost of living, basically. 31% of all voters put that as their priority issue. So really what we're talking about there is the inflation caused by Trump's war against Iran. It was already an issue kind of before February and this decision, but really since then we've seen petrol prices go from a bit under $3 per gallon to $4.5.
We have this illustration, data source US Energy Information Administration. They give relevant prices on diesel and on gasoline, on petrol station in America, in different part of America, in different states. Here you can see East Coast, New England, Central Atlantic, Midwest, Rocky Mountain, West Coast of California, so etc. So, and it shows increasing prices on diesel, on petrol station.
Yeah, so I mean, diesel's even sharper than petrol, like I described. And I think the key thing about this is it's so clearly Trump's fault. So usually when the economy is bad for lots of countries around the world. It's not obviously the president's fault. So Biden got a lot of criticism for the economy, but he was really dealing with the post-pandemic recession and trying to rebuild after the global economy shut down. So it wasn't just in America, but in lots of other countries. I think the anger against Trump is particularly sharp because, as we can see, like, people are paying almost double for their diesel.
Yes, in some states, I checked this information, and we see that this increasing of prices started in the beginning of March, after war against Iran began on 28th of February. In the beginning of March, they began to increase, and these prices in some states achieved $7.5 per gallon.
Yeah.
It's much more than psychologically Americans are ready to pay for diesel, for even gasoline. Its psychological level is about $5 per gallon, and here 7.5 in some states.
Yeah, and everything, because of that, all the prices go up. Any food you're transporting, it goes up. Everything goes up. So people, I think voters are really angry at Trump and Republicans more generally because of this. And then, like all the other kind of key metrics of Trump's popularity, of Republicans' popularity, it's all deeply unpopular. The second most important thing is about jobs, also largely failing there. Jobs in the economy overall.
Usually in the midterm elections, foreign policy doesn't play a big role as in usual elections, but this time we see this impact of foreign policy on internal policy, including war in Iran, how it affected on prices on gasoline and diesel, and how this migrant policy of Trump impacts on Americans, these measures of implementing this migrants policy. Tariffs policy also impacts. And here we have illustration how ratings of both parties are changing, and how also Iranian war impacts on it. Since 2024 elections, ratings changed. Republicans has lower positions, Democrats higher positions and ratings. Since war against Iran in February 2026, ratings, this gap between Democrats and Republicans ratings increased till 1%, and it is a big number, because in America about 330 million people. There are about more than 170 million of voters, and 1% can impact on results of election. It's very a big number. So it shows that it reflects of also Trump's rating, because he's slowing down now.
Yeah, so Trump's kind of personal ratings, whether Americans approve or don't approve of his presidency, are really getting kind of towards the lowest comparable ratings for presidents at this point in their term. And it's kind of reaching the point where it's already hit the minimum of Republicans, right? So he's got his core base, this MAGA base. But even digging into these, because there are Republicans who, MAGA Republicans who voted for him over issues of like not wanting to any more forever wars, foreign interventions. He promised to end all of this, and now he's invading, or striking against Iran. Lots of anger also over Epstein in this issue. He'd promised to release everything, and now he kind of buries it. So obviously he's very unpopular amongst Democrats. He's losing a lot of independents as well because of oil prices. But it's these kind of core issues that go against what he campaigned on that also explain why he's kind of losing some Republicans and really going quite low, even in a period of very partisan politics, right? People have their team and they cheer for it, like the illustration. So I think this really damages Republicans' chances in the midterms, because if Republicans aren't so enthusiastic about their champion, in Trump, then they're less likely to go out and vote, or maybe they'd even vote for a Democrat to try and limit Trump's power. So yeah, I think the presidential approval is also very important for these midterm elections.
What else? Economy, the first economy. Now we see that this foreign policy effects on economy, and then support of Trump and Republicans in the USA. Also, election turnout. Usually on midterm elections it is lower than ordinary elections. It's about 40%, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but it also will affect on the result, how Republicans and Democrats can mobilize their voters to make them to come to bring them to vote for their parties, favorable parties. Also, this war against Iran, we don't know if it is finishes till this elections or not. With if it is finishes, so with what result for the USA, it also will affect. And another element which can affect it is this redistricting or gerrymandering. Which is happening now. Usually it happens after population counting each 10 years in 2010, 2020, but not in this mid of period between population counting. But this time Trump made a decision to redistrict some districts, some states, and now we have this process which also will affect on the results of this election.
Yeah, and I suspect as we get closer to the election, there'll be a lot more of these types of issues, as Trump has a lot of mistrust of elections, of voting by mail, for example, of fraud and people on the voting register who shouldn't be there, these sorts of things. And as we saw in 2020, when it looked obvious he was going to lose the election, he really tried to change lots of the rules and force states to change the rules, because ultimately states are the ones who hold these elections. It's not a federal power, right? It's the states. So we might see more controversy around how the elections are run, not just the issues that are in voters' minds, but the mechanics of how elections actually happen, to try and push them in favour of Trump, and maybe in some democratic states also to try and give Democrats an advantage. There's a lot, I think, that still has to be decided, because we're almost 6 months before these elections, so there's a lot of unexpected factors that will appear and a lot of twists and turns to come. But I think we can already see quite a clear picture of where Americans' beliefs are and where their emotions are towards this Trump administration, towards Republicans in general. We can see the trajectory of where it might be going.
Yes, and now there are a lot of signs that Democrats have a big chances to receive majority in the House of Representatives, at least. We don't know about Senates. According to history, according to practice, on midterm elections, those parties who had majority, they usually lose about 25, 30 seats, and in Senate about 4 seats. So if in this year Democrats achieved such a good result and receive majority in the House of Representatives, how it can impact on the policy of White House? So we have several scenarios. One scenario is when Democrats receive majority in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate, Republicans save a majority. It's one scenario. Other scenario, when Democrats receive majority in the House and in the Senate. Other third scenario, when Republicans save majority in the House and in the Senate.
Yeah, so this is obviously really important, but it's not just about who has a majority, but kind of also about how big these majorities are. Because if it's a very narrow majority, then there's not so much either, that especially Democrats could do. So I think, like you said, it's almost certain that Democrats will win the House of Representatives. Already it's kind of given around 95% chance by polling kind of models, statistical models, and that's so far out from the election when so many things could change. So unless there's some incredible intervention, I think Democrats will likely win the House, and that's happened every midterm election since 2006. So I think it's an awful lot of it happens almost every time. The only kind of example before that was 2002, when Bush was very popular following 9/11 attacks. So if there's some sort of external intervention like that, maybe Trump's popularity could really increase. But otherwise, it's pretty obvious that Democrats will win the House. And so then it's the Senate that's really key. It's given about 50-50 chance. It's called a toss-up in American political terms of who will control it. This is the map of all the Senate seats. So 2 per state, and these numbers, kind of 1, 2, 2, 3, are the cycles of senators. So the 3 cycles within a 6-year period. And for this year, it would be cycle 2, which means the seats that were elected in 2020 are now up for election again. 2020 was a year that actually Democrats did very well. It was when Joe Biden won the presidency from Donald Trump, and amidst kind of failures over COVID, and people were very unhappy with Trump in general that time. So to increase Democrats' seats in the Senate, they have to win seats that they didn't win that year. So they have to outperform quite a good year. Because of the map and how it works, there's only 13 Democrats up for re-election and 20 Republicans, in addition to 2 special elections for seats in Florida and Ohio, which were held by J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, who are now in the administration. So they left their positions after the 2024 election. So there's in total 35 seats, and Democrats need to gain at least 4 to have a majority in the Senate. So the key ones to really look at are whether they can hold Georgia and Michigan, which are both states that Trump won in 2024 and are they have their own complications, especially in Michigan. There's a 3-way primary that's really dividing the Democratic Party between kind of far left, a centrist. Democrats are fighting against each other, and then once there's one candidate elected, they'll have to then fight against Republicans. So it's not easy for them to even hold these seats. Then they also have to win 4, particularly Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader of the Democrats, is looking at Maine, North Carolina, Ohio, and Alaska. So yeah, there's a kind of difficult map basically for Democrats, but because Trump is so unpopular, Republicans are so unpopular, it seems possible. So really the key things to look for are the results of these primaries in these states and any kind of controversies in these kind of 6 states. That will decide the future of Congress, that will decide in some ways the future of the world, and how much power Trump will have. So yeah, it's a really kind of strange system because so many of the states have clearly, down this west coast, it's clearly all Democrats. Towards the center, it's clearly all Republicans. There's only 3 states that have 1 Republican and 1 Democrat senator. You can see Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Maine are the only ones that have 1 of each. So it's very kind of difficult to change these things. But that's what Democrats have to do if they want to control Trump.
Let's try to imagine. So if we have a scenario when the House of Representatives Democrats receive, a majority in the House, but Senate is under Republicans' control. How this scenario will impact on the White House policy?
If we talk about foreign policy, it's really not so much. So yeah, the House's key power is to initiate money bills, bills that are kind of for funding. So for example, funding of the Department of Defense. This is the big power that Democrats have already used to try to change policy on Ukraine a little bit. So there was a $900 billion funding bill for the Department of Defense for the whole year. And in order to get Democratic and a couple of Republican votes to pass this, they attached a condition that there would be 800 million, so kind of less than 1%, included for Ukraine funding over the next 2 years. So this was kind of, Trump couldn't veto this bill because it's the entire funding for the entire US military. So he had to accept this small compromise of giving a little bit of money to Ukraine, not nearly as much as was given under Biden, but a little bit. So if Democrats control the House, they could maybe add some further demands into this. If you want this funding for this department, you have to agree to this demand. And if they control enough votes, they could, hold up legislation, basically, because legislation needs to be agreed by both the House and the Senate. So they could really have more power in this negotiating phase. And like we kind of mentioned earlier about a balance of power, they can stop some of the most extreme things that Republicans would want to do. But there's no way to change the president's decisions, especially on foreign policy, only kind of to restrict them. And again, it really depends how big this majority is. If they have quite a big majority in the House, there'll be a lot more power for making bigger demands.
But even if they have just simple majority, even 218 seats, they can elect their own speaker of majority, and speaker can affect on legislation agenda in the House, which laws which bills to vote, which not. And speaker has some power and can affect on this agenda. And but if Senate, if Republicans have Senate, so it can be problems when they will adopt some laws, because they need to agree each to other, because just war is not profitable for both sides. If Democrats will ban Republicans' laws and vice versa, it's not productive, and they will need to agree with each other.
But it often happens. Kind of the second half of a presidency is usually it's not nearly as productive as the first half. I mean, that's why Trump was so aggressive, so enthusiastic in the first year of his presidency to make all these big cuts and changes, because by the second half it gets controlled a lot more. And it's quite possible that Democrats basically block all legislation, so that's really kind of the legislation that Trump wants to make changes, maybe on immigration policy, lots of domestic stuff. The difficulty is that foreign policy, most powers just stay with the president. So controlling the House gives a little bit of leverage. Controlling the Senate would be a lot better for Democrats, but it still can't change Trump's decisions. It can't make him decide something else on the key powers that remain with the president.
Yes, and in 2018 midterm elections, during Trump's presidency, Democrats received majority in the House, but Republicans saved majority in the Senate. So we had such experience, and then in 2020, what it gave to Democrats, they could initiate impeachment against Trump in 2019, after these midterm elections, when they received a majority in the House of Representatives. They initiated impeachment against Trump, and the first reason for this first initiative of impeachment was interfering in Ukraine's affairs and pressure on President Zelensky. It was connected with Biden's son's case.
Yeah, so officially Trump was impeached on abuse of power. So Trump tried to, he by withholding aid for Ukraine, $400 million actually, so what's now being provided under Trump, and not as much as obviously comes now. $400 million worth of arms exports and a meeting with Zelensky in the White House. He basically said, you can't have this until you launch an investigation into Biden and Hunter Biden, basically to legitimize Trump's conspiracy theories, and also spread Trump's conspiracy theory that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the 2016 election, because Trump had, there'd been a long investigation into how Russia had interfered in the 2016 election to try to elect Trump. And so Trump tried to kind of counter this by pressuring Zelensky. Zelensky refused to do this, and eventually there were these kind of reports coming out of what had happened, and this was considered to be an abuse of power. So Trump was indicted. He was impeached on abuse of power and also on obstruction of justice. There were two cases, because once he was impeached for abuse of power, he basically ordered his staff not to cooperate, not to provide any evidence, not to appear and give testimony. So this was obstruction of justice, but both counts failed in the Senate. It was pretty much along party lines. It was 47-53 on obstruction of justice, which is Republicans, Democrats, 47 Democrats, 53 Republicans, and 48-52 on abuse of power. So Mitt Romney voted with the Democrats. But of course, it requires 67 senators to approve this impeachment and remove Trump. So it didn't come close.
By the way, any attempt of impeachment wasn't successful in USA, and no Trump, no Clinton, and no who else?
Andrew Johnson in 1868, and also Richard Nixon in 1974. The proceedings began, but he resigned before the House had voted. So in a sense, it was successful, but not through the official procedure.
Only Trump had 2 attempts.
Yeah, so the second attempt was in the kind of final week of his presidency in 2021, after he'd already lost the 2020 election. And it was to do with his response trying to overturn this election through insurrection, so launching an attack basically on the Capitol to stop the results being confirmed. And again, the House voted very strongly for it, 232 to 197, but that's really just the Democrats plus 10 Republicans. The Senate voted 57 guilty to 43 not guilty, which included 7 Republicans. So it got closer towards the threshold of 67, but still kind of quite far away, and just showing that the bar is so high. Trump had, I think in my opinion, very clearly launched an insurrection, but because Republicans are so partisan, they wanted to protect their president. And I suspect it will be the same with any case that comes after these elections too.
Yeah, but this case shows very good how it works when one party controls the House of Representatives and other party controls the Senate. That even in this case they can cooperate in some issues. But here Republicans choose to protect their president and didn't support Democrats. So when different parties control different houses, they need to agree. The House of Representatives can restrict power of president and presidential party, but not such successful as if it could be if one party controls both houses.
Exactly, but it's the threshold is a lot higher in the Senate. So the Democrats could control the Senate, but they would need a lot more than 51 votes to achieve impeachment and to remove Trump. Of course, even if they remove Trump, he's just replaced by J.D. Vance, so it's debatable whether that's a positive scenario for Ukraine or the world or America too. There are already some kind of discussions about impeaching Trump if Democrats win. They're not doing it too publicly, but there's kind of quite clear cases around. So the Constitution lists treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors as the things that could lead to impeachment. There's kind of cases around abuse of power, which would come under this high crime and misdemeanor, which is really around Trump launching investigations into political opponents, especially those who investigated him. So he's basically told his Department of Justice to investigate Senator Adam Schiff, former FBI Director James Comey, and New York Attorney General Letitia James. So basically political opponents, he wants them put in prison, which is clearly an abuse of power. Similarly, kind of lots of cases around corruption and bribery. We see almost daily stories of how if you pay money to Trump's family or to Trump's businesses, you can have access to the president, you can have favourable decisions. So one of the major cases around this is the Trump meme crypto coin. Basically, if you are one of the top investors, you get direct access to the president. So if you're one of the people who gives Trump personally money, you get access to the office of the president and American decision making. And one of the major problems is that the top investors have been mostly foreign nationals. So, for example, the top investor was a Chinese billionaire who made this investment, spoke with Trump at a private dinner, then had a case against him dropped in the US courts, and also Trump delayed this ban on TikTok. So the Chinese government basically achieved what they wanted in the US government by bribing Trump personally. So the Democrats have lots of these kind of cases, lots of evidence already collected, ready to be used. So I think it's very likely that one or more of these cases will be launched against Trump. And he's already said, he's told Republicans that we need to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. He's very worried about this. So I think it's one of the clearest consequences of these midterms is that, especially if Democrats only win the House, I think there will be a third impeachment for Donald Trump.
Republicans maybe can also support, more Republicans can support this initiative. We don't know. But let's imagine such scenario if Democrats will receive control, if Democrats receive control in the House and the Senate, how it affects on the White House policy, Trump's policy.
So at that point, the legislative agenda really dies. There's really nothing that Trump will be able to get through if he wants to make any reforms around healthcare or taxes or restructuring departments. All these sorts of things will just be blocked. It is, of course, possible that, being this great deal maker that he thinks he is, it's possible to make lots of deals to say, if you vote for this, then I'll approve this, and they could work together. But in reality, in recent years in American politics, that's just not been the case. And that the hatred that's on both sides really stops this from happening. So I think, domestic policy really dies. The problem is that really pushes Trump's focus to foreign policy, where the president's powers are a lot stronger. And we know, obviously, he's focused on Iran and he's focused on Ukraine. He has the power to conduct negotiations, the power to really conduct military affairs. So both the war against Iran, but also weapon sales to Ukraine, intelligence as well. There's not much that even a Democratic-controlled House and Senate could do to force Trump to give certain weapons to Ukraine, because they're controlled by the Department of Defense, which is part of the administration. Of course, they could pass bills to say, we want to give, let's say $60 billion to Ukraine.
$800 million to gain. Recent example.
Yeah. So this is what it will have to be ultimately. There's enough support. If Democrats win the House and the Senate, they could vote for a law that says $60 billion to Ukraine. The problem is that Trump will veto that, and to overcome this veto, you would need 67% of both houses, which seems very unlikely. So it then becomes really a process of negotiation, and there's kind of two key ways that the Democrats could try to make some progress on aid and on sanctions.
Also, sanctions is about presidential power.
To some extent, but the thing is, sanctions weren't in the Constitution. A lot of foreign policy is already decided in the Constitution, but sanctions aren't really the control of the commander-in-chief. It's an economic tool, and ultimately the House has control over monetary policy, or at least should do, in initiating monetary policy. And all of the sanctions laws came from Congress. So Congress has the power to decide how sanctions should be, but they can't work without the president's approval. So all of these issues, there's a threat of a Trump veto.
Yeah.
And that's what That's what Congress has to overcome.
Yeah, they can overcome this veto, but they need 2/3 votes.
Yeah, and so I've kind of thought about it, and there's 2 ways that you can get around it. Right. The first is this kind of combining issues together, like we spoke about with the defense spending. So when Democrats had not control in the House or the Senate, they managed to get 800 million to Ukraine. When they control both, they can make maybe bigger demands and say, Trump, if you want to fund our military for the next year, you have to agree to give this amount to Ukraine. And then it becomes a negotiating position of how much can they achieve. If Trump plays really hard, hardball, then it could be very difficult. There could be no funding. If he's ready to make a deal, then it could be quite productive. And the more support Democrats get from Republicans, maybe the easier it could be. But if they have control over both and they can control this majority, then that could work. The other way is like building coalitions with Republicans to get to this 2/3 majority to override the veto. So that would probably mean kind of reducing their demands, but there might be enough Republicans who are willing to break with Trump finally. So then it becomes not negotiating with Trump so much, but negotiating with other Republican senators to get to this 67 senators and 2/3 of the House. And it seems very difficult in the current climate because Republicans pretty much entirely vote with Donald Trump. My hope is that possibly after the midterms, they'll see that Trump is not where their political future lies. Right? So Trump's incredibly unpopular, and they can be re-elected by breaking with Trump, not by attaching themselves to a sinking ship. And also Trump he's powerless. He doesn't have this control over the party anymore. And we know that actually a lot of Republicans maybe do support Ukraine without Trump's influence. And the great example of this is the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act in 2017, which was an act that put sanctions on Iran, North Korea, and Russia under Trump's first presidency. And it was voted 419-3 in the House and 98-2 in the Senate. So overwhelmingly bipartisan support. And Trump couldn't fight this because he could veto it, it would be overridden. This was something that they managed to all agree together in Congress. So in that sense, Democrats winning control would give them kind of the power to start this legislation, to control the timetabling and make sure it gets voted on. But really, they would need to negotiate with Republicans. And so in that sense, I think the key of the midterms is not just about who gets which seats, but about how it affects Trump's control over the Republican Party. Because if you can break Trump's control, then we could see a more kind of reasonable policy towards Ukraine and also towards NATO and towards Iran and so on. So I think, those are kind of the 2 ways through bipartisan coalitions and by bundling issues together that a Democrat-controlled Congress could manage to control Trump's foreign policy.
And after these elections, midterm elections, both parties begin to think about next elections, 2028, and of course, and Republicans also will look at this, at their policy from the point of view of how Trump affects on their ratings, Trump's policy effects, and make decision, taking it into account. And of course, I think also that they, in some issues, they will cooperate. We talk about this scenario if Democrats take control on the House and the Senate. And they, in this case, they will receive more power, and according to laws, American laws, they can restrict presidential power more. But if we talked earlier, Trump tries to avoid these restrictions when he calls agreement not agreement, not treaty, but just presidential act, some act. And there is such a tool in American policy as courts, including federal court, Supreme Court, and we see how political parties try to bring this balance back through these courts when court cancel such presidential decisions to go in such way. But if one party has majority in both houses, it receives more power and possibilities to restrict presidential power.
Yeah, completely. I think one of the great examples of this Trump's power over treaties is, for example, the mineral deal in Ukraine signed last year. It wasn't officially a treaty, it was just Trump's decision. The same with this trade deal with the EU, just Trump's signature. Nothing goes through the Senate anymore. So even though they have this official power, the presidency in America has developed so that it's really got the kind of almost complete control over foreign policy. And with the courts, yeah, it's a potential possibility. The issue is that the Supreme Court is really controlled by the Republican-leaning judges or more kind of conservative judges who've been appointed by Trump and other Republican presidents. So unless it's a very obvious breach of the Constitution, I think we shouldn't expect them to decide something against Trump. Although there is one of the ways that they interpret presidential power is if it goes against the explicit decisions of Congress, it's considered kind of the weakest grounds for presidential power. So in theory, if Democrats control the Congress and explicitly tell Trump, don't end sanctions against Russia, for example, and he then does it, then the courts might decide against Trump on that issue.
I have just thought that we forgot about such important element which can affect on American election results, such as Russian or Chinese interference in elections.
Or Ukrainian.
Or Ukrainian. And in our illustration, we see this audience, which is contemplating this election, how it goes, and the results. And there are players who big players who has their own interests, and for which Trump's policy can be profitable, such for Russia, for example, because we see how Trump's policy impacts on Russia. Less sanctions, more and less support of Ukraine, which is profitable in this war against Iran with their prices on oil. So, and China has own global interest. How do you think? We'll receive some pieces of news about their interfering in American elections this year?
Maybe. I mean, Russia, we know, is still trying it constantly in Europe, in every election in Europe. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try it in America too. The problem is, I think they obviously favour Trump over any Democratic candidate. But before the election, I think they weren't so certain. They thought Trump was a lot more unpredictable. I think having worked with him very closely for a year and a half now, they kind of know that they can control him. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see some Russian influence operations. And with China, we know that, I mean, TikTok was one of the big stories of the 2024 election, and this attempt to ban TikTok or to have it in American control, basically. And it's still kind of being decided, but if China retains some control over it, they could obviously push content that favours their candidate. But again, it's hard to know. I think they also feared Trump and what he could do, but I think they've also become very comfortable with the situation. They feel like they can control him as well, through things like I mentioned, through this buying his crypto coin, through basically giving deals to his friends or to his family. I think they know how to manage him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see either Russia or China try to nudge the election towards Trump's favour. The problem is, 10 years ago, none of this was expected or prepared for. But now I think the electoral system kind of is aware that foreign interference is likely, and how can they protect against it?
I hope, yeah, they have enough possibilities to protect themselves from foreign interference. So our key conclusion to this discussion that Trump would like to save majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate. It would give him more freedom in his internal and foreign policy. But Democrats have a good chance to take majority, at least in the House of Representatives, and in some way it will restrict the White House policy, especially in internal policy, but in some way they can restrict the White House also in external and foreign policy. And in this case, Democrats can elect their speaker, can define legislative agenda, can control officials through hearings, so on. But the Democrats also would like to receive control in both houses, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, which is not so easy. And in this case, they would receive more power to impact on the White House policy and restrict Trump and the actions in internal and foreign policy. We don't know who will win this year for sure, and we will contemplate it, we will monitor. Stay tuned for more content on the website Billi-Villi.com, on Facebook page Billi-Villi, and on YouTube channel Billi-Villi. See you!